The desert stretched endlessly under a merciless sun, its heat rolling in waves that distorted the horizon. Sergeant Major Lauren Hawley wiped the sweat from her brow, scanning the cracked earth ahead through the dust-caked windshield of her Humvee. She was the only woman in this Delta Force convoy, and though the team had once questioned her presence, over the years they had learned better. Hawley was precise, unflinching, and lethal. Her reputation wasn't built on words. It was forged in drills, close-quarters combat, and missions that tested the limits of both mind and body. Today's operation was supposed to be routine. A high-value target had been spotted in a remote northern Syrian village. Their job was simple: infiltrate, secure the target, and exfiltrate before local militia could react. Intelligence had promised a narrow window, and Hawley had planned every step. But even with all her calculations, she couldn't predict the chaos that waited in the valley ahead. The convoy advanced in silence, each vehicle a ghost among the ochre dunes. Dust swirled in spirals around the tires, but the desert held no comfort. Hale's eyes flicked to the GPS, and then to the horizon. The wind shifted slightly, a subtle warning. She felt it in her gut. Something was off. The ground hummed faintly under the tires, almost imperceptible. She alerted the convoy leader, Captain Reese, a veteran of multiple operations, who shrugged. They were Delta. They didn't panic. They pressed on. Then, it hit. The first shot tore through the cab of her Humvee. Glass shattered, and metal screamed. Hawley instinctively dropped, her hands tightening on the steering wheel as bullets pocked the vehicle. Beside her, her teammate barked a warning. More rounds ripped into the convoy, setting the sand ablaze with fire and smoke. Hale's instincts kicked in. She grabbed her sidearm, fired through the shattered window, and barked orders over the chaos. But the ambush was precise. The enemy knew every approach, every cover, every escape route. The convoy's Humvees tried to maneuver, but a rocket slammed into the rear, throwing dust and flames into the sky. Hale's vehicle rolled violently, tossing her into the side, her body slamming into broken metal. Pain radiated from her ribs. Blood trickled down her temple. She tried to crawl from the wreckage, but debris pinned her leg. Her radio crackled. The comms were fried. Voices screamed her name, but the words were drowned in static. Then came the command that froze her blood. "We can't reach Hawley. Pull out." Hale's eyes widened. Pull out? She blinked through the dust, trying to lift her head. The convoy was retreating, leaving her behind. For a moment, she thought it was a nightmare. It had to be. She had trained for worse, but being abandoned? That was new. Rage and disbelief surged, but she didn't allow panic. Delta taught discipline above all. The desert could kill her, but fear never would. With a grunt, she levered herself from the wreck, dragging her shattered leg through sand that burned like fire. She tasted blood, felt the sting of torn clothing against raw skin, yet her mind remained razor-sharp. Survival was all she had left, and she clung to it fiercely. She assessed her environment quickly. Ridges to her left, a cluster of rocks for cover, and miles of open sand to the west. Every instinct screamed for movement, but the wound in her leg demanded careful pacing. One wrong step could be fatal. Hale's training kicked in. She shifted her weight, supporting herself with one arm, crawling toward the nearest cover. Every motion was calculated, deliberate. She scanned constantly for threats, local militia patrols, drones, and any other predators of the desert. She was a Delta operator, and even abandoned, she was not helpless. Her thoughts flicked briefly to home. Memories of her father's voice, steady and unyielding. Pain is temporary. Mission is forever. It had been her guiding mantra through Ranger School, through grueling field exercises, through deployments that left others broken. That voice, echoing in her mind now, steeled her resolve. The desert was trying to break her. She would not allow it. Hours blurred. The sun dipped lower, painting the sand in shades of fire and blood. Halle crawled, hid, and assessed each ridge as if calculating chess moves. Nightfall brought cold winds, and for the first time, she allowed herself to shiver. Dehydration clawed at her throat, hunger gnawed at her belly, and the pain in her leg flared with every movement. But she refused to succumb. Each step forward was a small victory. Each breath a declaration. I am not dead. By late evening, she stumbled upon a wrecked Syrian transport truck. Its door hung loosely on rusted hinges. Halle pried it open, dragging herself inside. It smelled of oil and rot, but it offered shelter. She used a piece of fabric to wrap her bleeding leg, improvising a tourniquet. Her fingers shook as she tore strips from her uniform, pressing them to her wounds. Every cut, every bruise was a reminder of the betrayal, of the men who left her. She allowed herself a quiet vow, whispered into the cool night. They will know I lived. They will know. And they will pay for leaving me behind. As darkness enveloped the desert, Hale's mind remained alert, calculating escape routes, enemy patterns, and the likelihood of survival. Her body ached beyond comprehension, but her mind was sharper than ever. She understood that in Delta, missions weren't just about survival. They were about adapting, enduring, and turning impossible odds into victories. Somewhere beyond the dunes, her team believed she was gone. They had signed her name on the list. Command would move forward without her. But Hale's heart beat fiercely, unbroken, alive. And as the first stars of night pierced the desert sky, she crawled from the truck once more, ready to face whatever horrors the desert would throw at her. Alone, abandoned, but utterly unstoppable. This was only the beginning. The desert had tried to claim her, but Sergeant Major Lauren Halle was Delta through and through, and Delta didn't fear death. The sun rose like a molten disk over the endless dunes, casting long, jagged shadows that seemed to mock her struggle. Sergeant Major Lauren Halle lay sprawled beneath the wrecked Syrian truck, the tourniquet she had fashioned from her uniform cutting painfully into her leg. Her breathing was shallow, each inhale a ragged gasp. The pain throbbed in rhythm with the desert wind, a relentless reminder that the earth itself was against her. She could feel her strength waning, her muscles trembling, yet she refused to surrender. Surrender meant death, and Halle had never surrendered. She crawled out from under the truck, dragging her shattered leg through the searing sand. Her hands left red streaks across the desert floor. Each step felt like a mile, each movement an eternity. But with every inch, she reminded herself of the Delta Creed. Adapt, endure, overcome. She focused on survival, breaking the desert into segments, move from one ridge to the next, conserve energy, find shade, and most importantly, avoid detection. The wrecked convoy and the retreating team were behind her now, swallowed by the heat haze. The betrayal stung sharper than the bullet wound in her leg. She couldn't process it fully, not yet. Rage simmered beneath the surface, fueling her forward. They had left her to die, and the thought ignited a primal fire. Hale's mind cycled through every drill, every training exercise, every survival scenario she had endured. Years of Delta training now became her lifeline. Pain existed only to be managed. Fear existed only to be overcome. Her lips were parched. Her canteen had long since run dry. She rationed her remaining sips of water with meticulous care, knowing that dehydration would be as deadly as any enemy rifle. She scanned the dunes, noting the pattern of shadows and the faint trails of animals, anything that could guide her to life or warn of danger. Every instinct she had honed over years of covert operations screamed that she was being watched. Perhaps by locals. Perhaps by enemy forces. Perhaps by someone who had orchestrated the ambush. As the sun climbed, Hale stumbled upon a cluster of rocks that offered partial shade. She collapsed beside them, leaning against the rough stone. Sweat poured from her body, mixing with blood from a gash on her temple. Her vision blurred at the edges, and she closed her eyes briefly, willing herself to focus. In the silence of the desert, she began to replay the ambush over and over, analyzing every moment, every movement. It had not been a random attack. The precision, the timing, the knowledge of her convoy's exact approach, someone had set this trap. Her mind drifted to her father's voice, steady and commanding from years ago. Pain is temporary. Mission is forever. She whispered it aloud, the words tasting like grit on her tongue. She remembered long nights of ranger training, of being tested until she could no longer stand. This was no different, except the stakes were higher. No drill could have prepared her for the betrayal, for the loneliness, for the knowledge that her own team had written her off as dead. Hale shifted herself along the sand, inch by agonizing inch, using her arms to pull forward. Every movement sent sparks of agony shooting through her leg. Yet the human body, when driven by sheer will, adapts in ways the mind cannot predict. Her breathing grew rhythmic, controlled, each exhale a mantra. Move, survive, live. By midday, she stumbled across the remnants of a long-abandoned outpost, nothing more than rusted metal and broken wood, but it offered shelter. Hale crawled inside, using the structure to shield her from the sun. Her stomach gnawed at her, and thirst was clawing mercilessly at her throat. She found a small pouch with dried rations, half-molded, but better than nothing. Carefully, she nibbled, savoring each bite as if it were a delicacy. Every decision was tactical. Energy must be preserved for movement, for defense, for escape. As she rested, her mind wandered to the team that had left her behind. Memories of brief camaraderie, of shared laughter and training, clashed violently with the present reality of betrayal. She pictured Reese giving the order to retreat, his voice calm and detached. How easily they had written her off. A cold anger settled in her chest, but it did not consume her, not yet. First, she would survive. Then she would return. Nightfall brought a biting cold, a cruel contrast to the day's scorching heat. Hale wrapped herself in remnants of her uniform, shivering despite the layers. Her leg throbbed relentlessly, a constant reminder of mortality. But in the quiet darkness, she began to hear the desert itself, the subtle movement of creatures, the whispering wind, the distant calls of unknown animals. She learned to move with the night, to become invisible. Every stalk, every careful crawl honed her instincts further. Days blurred into nights. Hale found herself scavenging from abandoned enemy positions, taking food, water, and even a weapon or two. Each encounter was tense, requiring precision and silence. She became a ghost in the desert, a myth whispered among local fighters. The woman who moved like wind, who appeared and vanished without warning. They never saw her coming. She struck only when necessary, and only enough to survive. She was alive and deadly. Her body was breaking, but her mind was sharpened to an almost supernatural edge. Sleep came in short bursts, often interrupted by hallucinations or nightmares of the ambush. Yet with each night, she trained herself to fight the pain, the thirst, the hunger. Every setback was an opportunity to adapt. Every injury was a lesson in resilience. One morning, she came upon the wreckage of a Syrian transport truck, half buried in sand. Its metal was hot from the sun, its interior dusty and stinking of decay, yet it offered hope. Hal pried open the door and crawled inside, shielding herself from the wind. She scavenged a small radio, broken but potentially repairable, and began plotting her next moves. She realized that survival alone was not enough. she needed answers. She had been betrayed. She had been left to die. And she would return to uncover the truth. By the end of her second week in the desert, Halle had transformed. She was no longer just a soldier lost behind enemy lines. She had become a predator of the sands. Her movements were deliberate, her mind an arsenal of strategy. Pain and deprivation had sharpened her instincts. She knew she could no longer rely on luck or hope. Only skill, patience, and sheer determination would carry her home. And as she crawled toward the distant horizon, every step echoed a promise. They thought I would die. They thought they had won. But Delta doesn't fear death, and I am far from finished. The desert had become both her enemy and her ally. Days of crawling, hiding, and surviving had transformed Sergeant Major Lauren Howe into something almost unrecognizable, even to herself. Her body ached constantly, her wounds throbbed with unrelenting pain, and her thirst gnawed at her throat like fire. Yet every hardship honed her senses, sharpening her mind to a razor's edge. She had learned the desert's rhythms, the whisper of sand shifting in the wind, the subtle shimmer of movement miles away, the distant bark of animals that warned of intruders. By the third day, Halle had begun to move with calculated precision. She was no longer merely surviving. She was hunting. Local insurgents, unaware of her presence, scouted the same dunes she had crossed. She watched them from ridges, studying their movements, learning their habits. The slightest misstep would have been fatal, but Halle was patient. Every step, every breath, every shift in posture was deliberate. She became a phantom in the desert, a myth forming even in the minds of those who sought to kill her. Halle had scavenged enough supplies to remain mobile, but she knew she could not rely on mere chance. The enemy was skilled, and the desert was unforgiving. She approached a small militia outpost with caution, using rocks and shadows as cover. Her heart pounded in rhythm with her slow, deliberate movements. She observed silently, noting weapon placements, patrol rotations, and weak points in their security. Her training allowed her to calculate risks with near-perfect accuracy. She did not attack recklessly. She was learning, preparing, surviving. And then she found it, the faint trace of American markings buried within the militia's intelligence logs. It was subtle. Coordinates, encrypted messages, references to a Delta convoy that had been ambushed. Her stomach tightened. The ambush hadn't been random. The precision, the timing, the knowledge of her convoy's exact approach. Someone within the United States had betrayed her. It was a realization that hit harder than any bullet. She had been left to die, not by fate, but by design. Her rage was a slow-burning fire, controlled and purposeful. She knew the enemy did not yet suspect the ghost in the desert. They thought she was dead. And they were right, to a point. To them, she had vanished. But Halle was very much alive, and she was preparing to turn the hunter into the hunted. For days, she moved silently, striking only when absolutely necessary. A patrol that wandered too close at night would find their ammunition missing, their communication devices destroyed, or a warning scratched into the sand. She is watching. Her methods were subtle, precise, almost surgical. Every action reinforced the legend of the ghostly woman who survived impossible odds. Halle became a whisper among the enemy, a shadow that killed with efficiency and vanished without a trace. Despite her focus, the physical toll was immense. Her wounds festered, infection threatened, and her dehydration worsened. Hallucinations came in waves. She saw phantom soldiers, heard voices calling her name, sometimes in English, sometimes in Arabic. She fought them with sheer will, reminding herself that survival was a battle of mind as much as body. Every hallucination became a test, and she passed each one, reinforcing her mental armor. Amidst the chaos, she found fragments of her fallen comrades' equipment, dog tags, torn patches, a rifle left in haste. Each discovery brought a mixture of sorrow and determination. They had left her behind, but she carried their honor forward. She scavenged their weapons and supplies, integrating them into her survival plan. Every tool was vital. Every scrap of information could save her life. Then, one night, she intercepted a weak signal on a damaged radio she had managed to repair partially. It was faint, a snippet of English, a conversation she could barely understand. Her pulse quickened as she recognized a familiar voice. Captain Reese. Her anger surged anew. He was alive, communicating with command, yet she had been written off, abandoned in the desert. The betrayal was confirmed. This was no accident. This was deliberate. Someone had orchestrated her near death. But Halle did not panic. Panic had no place in the Delta Force Creed. She meticulously traced the signal, decoding as much as she could. Her skills as a communications specialist came alive, piecing together fragments of messages, triangulating positions, and understanding enemy patterns. Every intercepted conversation was a puzzle piece, and she was building the picture of the conspiracy that had left her for dead. As she moved under the cover of darkness, Halle began to consider her options. Direct confrontation was impossible. She was outnumbered, wounded, and far from reinforcements. Stealth and precision were her weapons. She would remain unseen until the time was right. Each night she moved closer to the insurgent positions that held the evidence she needed. Each day she mapped escape routes and potential allies among locals who had survived the chaos of the ambush. Her survival instincts were now intertwined with her desire for justice. She was no longer merely trying to make it out alive. She was tracking, learning, planning. Every patrol she observed, every camp she infiltrated, every scrap of intel she acquired, strengthened her resolve. Halle was becoming the legend the desert whispered about, a woman who could not be killed, a force of nature in human form. By the end of her first week as the ghost of the desert, she had struck her first real blow. A small insurgent communications outpost was disabled silently, equipment destroyed, and key documents stolen. She moved like smoke, leaving no trace but fear. The militia would speak of her in whispers, but they would never see her coming. Her wounds throbbed, her body screamed, but she was alive, and that was all that mattered. Halle knew that the next step was returning to her own people, to expose the betrayal and the saboteur who had left her for dead. But first, she needed to survive the desert, and the desert was unforgiving. Sandstorms could bury her in minutes, dehydration could kill, and infection could claim her faster than any bullet. Yet with every challenge, she became stronger, sharper, and more unyielding. She was no longer a soldier lost behind enemy lines. She was a force of vengeance and survival, a ghost that would not rest until justice was served. The desert night settled over her like a cloak, but Hale's mind burned with clarity. She had been abandoned, left to die in the unforgiving sands, yet she had endured. The ambush had not broken her. It had transformed her. And as she gazed at the distant lights of a village where enemy forces had taken refuge, she whispered to the wind, "They thought I was dead. They were wrong. And now they will know the ghost of the desert watches them." Halle continued moving through the dunes, silent and invisible, a shadow cast long across the sand. Every instinct, every decision, every movement was honed toward one goal: survival, justice, and the revelation that Delta Force didn't fear death, and neither did she. The desert night had become Hale's ally. Shadows were no longer mere absence of light. They were her camouflage. Sergeant Major Lauren Howell moved with a predator's grace, silent footsteps disturbing the sand as little as a whisper. She had survived the ambush, endured dehydration and injury, and now she hunted with precision. No longer was she merely trying to live. She was exacting her presence on a hostile land, a phantom in the dunes. The local militias had begun to whisper of her. A lone woman striking without warning, dismantling communications, sabotaging supply caches, and disappearing as if the desert itself had swallowed her whole. Halle crouched behind a ridge, observing a small insurgent outpost. Her eyes were sharp, calculating patrol patterns, noting the rotation of guards and the timing of sentries' watches. The outpost was poorly fortified, a perfect target. She had discovered a weakness, a small communications shack at the edge of the compound, where sensitive messages and coordinates passed through every night. She knew that if she struck carefully, she could gather information vital, not only to her survival, but to uncovering the truth behind the ambush that had left her for dead. Every movement had to be deliberate. Halle crawled low, each step a battle between pain and necessity. Her leg throbbed fiercely, but she had long since learned to manage the agony. Her rifle, scavenged from a previous encounter, was an extension of her will. She paused, waiting for a patrol to pass. A lone guard crossed her path, oblivious to the shadow just beyond sight. Hale's breathing slowed, her heart synchronized to her movements. She advanced, silent as the night wind, slipping past the soldier as if he were a statue. Reaching the communications shack, Halle examined the equipment. Old radios and damaged computers hummed faintly, transmitting data she could not yet access fully. But among the papers and crude maps, she found what she had been seeking: files marked with American insignia, coordinates of her convoy, details of the ambush, and encrypted communications linking a senior U.S. officer to the betrayal. Her stomach twisted, rage flaring hot and cold simultaneously. This had been deliberate. Someone had orchestrated the ambush from inside their own ranks. She took photographs of every document, committing every detail to memory, and then sabotaged the communications equipment, leaving it in ruin. The insurgents would believe the ghost had struck once again. Halle slipped back into the night, moving like smoke across the sand, leaving no trace except the faint footprints that the wind would soon erase. The desert was hers to navigate, and she had learned its secrets. Every ridge, every dune, every shadow was a pathway to survival and to vengeance. Days turned into nights, and Hale's legend grew. Enemy forces spoke in hushed tones about the desert ghost, a specter that struck without warning and vanished as quickly as it appeared. She moved between outposts, disabling supply lines, stealing weapons and intel, and leaving coded warnings behind. Each act was calculated, each strike purposeful. She did not kill recklessly. She struck only to ensure her survival and to gather the proof that would expose the betrayal. Hale's mind, razor-sharp despite exhaustion and injury, began connecting the dots. The precision of the ambush, the detailed knowledge of her convoy's movements, and the pattern of enemy reinforcements all pointed to one truth. The attack had been planned with insider information. Someone within Delta or intelligence had marked her for death. The realization was cold and unrelenting, yet it fueled her determination. Survival was no longer enough. She would uncover the full truth. Her survival instincts became intertwined with strategy. Halle used the desert's natural features to her advantage, moving through wadis, ridges, and rocky outcrops to avoid detection. She scavenged food and water from abandoned enemy camps, sometimes using ingenious methods to purify tainted water or catch small desert creatures. Her body was failing, her wounds infected, but her mind was sharper than ever. The desert had tested her and found her worthy. At night, she rested sparingly, hiding in small crevices or behind dunes, using the cold desert wind to numb pain and keep alert. Her dreams were haunted by images of her team leaving her behind, of Reese's calm voice ordering the retreat, of the ambush that had shattered everything. But each nightmare strengthened her resolve. The desert had taken her comfort and safety, but it could not touch her purpose. She was alive. She was Delta, and she would not be defeated. One night, Halle intercepted a faint enemy radio transmission. Her heart raced as she recognized a familiar English voice, Captain Reese. His words were clipped, professional, yet filled with frustration. She listened silently, noting every detail. The messages hinted at panic, questions about what had gone wrong, and faint mentions of a missing operative that could only be her. She realized the time had come to begin reaching back to her own command, not yet in person, but through evidence and strategy. She had to expose the betrayal before she could trust anyone again. Hale's plan began to take shape. She would gather undeniable proof, intercepted communications, stolen documents, and enemy intelligence she could trace back to the source. Every successful raid strengthened her network of knowledge. Every patrol she evaded, every outpost she infiltrated, reinforced her position as the ghost of the desert, unseen, deadly, and intelligent beyond their expectations. She was no longer just surviving. She was manipulating the battlefield, creating fear and uncertainty among those who had once hunted her. And then she encountered a small group of enemy soldiers traveling along a ridge in the early dawn light. Their chatter and weapons indicated they were scouts, but to Halle, they were a test. She waited patiently, calculating their path, the sun in her favor, the wind masking her scent. One wrong movement could expose her, but Halle had trained for this. With surgical precision, she disabled their communications, leaving them scrambling in confusion, and disappeared into the desert before they could mount a counterattack. Her legend grew silently, spreading through whispers of fear among insurgent ranks. As days passed, Halle moved closer to key insurgent positions, collecting evidence, sabotaging operations, and mapping escape routes. Each night she reviewed her findings, committing coordinates and names to memory. Her body ached, infection threatened, and dehydration clawed at her, but her mind remained unbroken. She was no longer just a soldier lost in the desert. She was a strategist, a predator, a force that had been underestimated by both the enemy and the men who had left her behind. By the end of this 4th week, Halle had transformed completely. The desert had forged her into a weapon of survival, cunning, and intelligence. She had proof, she had strategy, and she had the skill to reclaim her narrative. She was no longer merely abandoned or wounded. She was in control. And as she crouched atop a ridge, scanning the horizon, she whispered to the wind, "They left me to die. They will regret it. I am coming back." The desert had been a crucible, testing every fiber of her being. And Halle had emerged, not broken, but stronger, smarter, and more dangerous than anyone could have imagined. She had become the ghost of the desert, invisible but omnipresent, patient but relentless. And the world would soon learn that Delta Force did not fear death, and neither did Sergeant Major Lauren Halle. The wind howled across the desert, carrying the scent of dust, heat, and distant smoke. Sergeant Major Lauren Hall, battered, dehydrated, and still bleeding from old wounds, moved with a predator's precision across the shifting sands. She had been abandoned, left to die, yet every bruise, every scar, every blistered foot had made her stronger. For 16 days, she had survived the desert, outwitted insurgent patrols, and collected evidence of betrayal. Now, her thoughts turned toward home, toward the outpost where her team believed she was dead. She approached the American base under the cover of night. Its silhouette rose against the horizon, a beacon of both hope and confrontation. The guards, trained to identify threats with lethal efficiency, were her first concern. One misstep, one false movement, and she would be shot on sight. Halle slowed, crouching low, using sand dunes as cover. Her body screamed for rest, but she pushed through, every instinct telling her that she had survived this far for a reason. When she reached the perimeter, the first challenge appeared: automated security sensors. Holly studied them carefully, timing each patrol and camera sweep. Her hand brushed against the sand as she crawled, feeling every vibration beneath her fingertips. Sweat and blood mixed on her face, streaking her vision, but she ignored the pain. This was not the time to falter. She needed to make it inside, alive, and in one piece. At last, Holly reached the base wall. Guards patrolled lazily, unaware that their presumed dead colleague had returned. One soldier lifted his rifle as she moved from shadow to shadow, but she froze, then spoke in a calm, firm voice. "Sergeant Major Hall, stand down. I'm Delta." Recognition flickered across his face. Confusion rippled through the perimeter. Slowly, word spread. She's alive. Inside the base, silence reigned. The medics rushed to her, astonished at the sight of the woman who had survived 16 days in the desert with severe injuries. Holly was guided to the infirmary, where she collapsed onto a cot, exhaustion threatening to consume her. But even as her body weakened, her mind remained sharp. She had a mission beyond survival now: truth and justice. She needed to confront Captain Reese, uncover the betrayal, and ensure those responsible were held accountable. Diaz, the young corporal who had refused to believe she was dead, was the first to enter the infirmary. Relief and admiration shone in his eyes as he helped her with minor wounds. "We thought we lost you," he whispered. Hale's lips curled into a faint, knowing smile. "They left me behind," she replied quietly. "But I'm back, and it's time they pay attention." Holly demanded immediate access to mission files. She wanted to verify every detail she had gathered in the desert. Her fingers traced maps, photographs, and intercepted messages, each confirming the betrayal she had suspected. The ambush had not been an accident. Someone within their ranks had orchestrated it. Coordinates had been leaked, intelligence manipulated, and lives, her life, risked for reasons she was only beginning to understand. Reese entered the infirmary soon after, his face pale and haunted. He had heard the whispers, seen the chaos in the command center as news of her survival spread. "Lauren," he began, but she cut him off. Her voice was cold, unwavering. "You left me." "Why?" The room grew silent. Reese's gaze dropped, shame mixing with fear. Hale's eyes bore into him, unflinching. "I survived the desert," she continued. "Now you will answer for what happened. Every detail, every lie, every decision that put my life in jeopardy." The weight of betrayal hung heavy in the air. Holly had returned, but she was not seeking revenge. She sought truth and accountability. Meanwhile, the base was in turmoil. Soldiers whispered in hallways about the ghost of the desert who had returned, armed with evidence and resolve. Command struggled to contain the story, fearing exposure, fearing the fallout. Hale's presence had shattered assumptions and authority alike. She was a living testament to resilience, skill, and unbroken will. In the days following her return, Holly began methodically reconstructing the events of the ambush. With Diaz assisting, she traced every movement, every decision, every breach of protocol. The evidence pointed clearly to a senior intelligence officer who had compromised the mission, using her convoy as a cover to manipulate outcomes for personal gain. The betrayal was not only strategic, but deeply personal. They had assumed she would die, that her absence would silence inquiry. They had underestimated her resolve. Holly also prepared for the psychological confrontation with her team. She knew the pain of abandonment would be complicated by loyalty, fear, and denial. Some would attempt to justify their decisions. Others would avoid facing the truth. Hale's strategy was clear: controlled confrontation, evidence in hand, and the unyielding presence of someone who had survived impossible odds. During her first meeting with the surviving team members, emotions ran high. Eyes widened at her scars, at the calm yet intense expression that betrayed no fatigue, only resolve. Holly did not waste words on sentiment. "I survived 16 days alone," she stated firmly. "And I know what happened. Someone betrayed us. Someone tried to kill me. I intend to expose the truth, and I need every one of you to cooperate." Whispers filled the room. Some avoided her gaze. Others trembled with guilt. The dynamic of authority had shifted. Holly was no longer subordinate. She had become the axis of the mission itself. Night fell over the base, and Hala sat alone reviewing maps, intercepted communications, and photographs of enemy positions. Every line, every code, every pattern told the story she already knew. Betrayal had come from within, not from the enemy. Her fingers traced coordinates, her mind calculating steps, counteractions, and methods of verification. She would not act impulsively. Delta had trained her for patience, precision, and strategy. She would strike only when the truth was undeniable. But amid the strategic calculations, Holly allowed herself a brief reflection. Memories of crawling through sand, rationing water, evading patrols, and improvising survival techniques surged through her mind. Pain and fear had become her allies, sharpening her focus and determination. She had emerged stronger than ever, her body battered, but her spirit unbroken. The desert had tried to claim her, but she had transcended it. She was no longer merely a soldier. She was a force of nature, a testament to human resilience and Delta training. By the 5th day after her return, Hale's preparations for confrontation were complete. She had compiled the evidence, rehearsed her statements, and planned every step of disclosure. She knew the consequences would ripple across the command chain, but she no longer feared reprisal. The desert had taught her that life and death were transient. Survival and truth were eternal. As she stood on the base perimeter one evening, looking out at the desert that had tested her, Holly felt a quiet satisfaction. She had survived betrayal, injury, and isolation. She had outwitted the enemy and uncovered the first threads of deception. The journey toward justice had begun, and the world, starting with her team, her command, and the betrayer, would soon realize that Delta Force did not fear death. And neither did Sergeant Major Lauren Holly. The stage was set. The ghost of the desert had returned, stronger, wiser, and ready to reclaim her mission, her honor, and her life. Sergeant Major Lauren Hala sat in the dimly lit operations room, her eyes scanning a series of intercepted messages, field reports, and encrypted files. Each document, each photograph, each map piece told the same story. The ambush that had left her for dead was not an accident. Someone within the chain of command had deliberately leaked intelligence to the insurgents. Her fingers traced the lines of a corrupted operational plan, the handwriting of betrayal hidden among lines of legitimate orders. She had survived the desert, evaded enemy patrols, and pieced together every fragment of the puzzle. Now, she was ready to confront the truth. Captain Reese, who had once led the convoy, hovered nearby, his face pale and unsettled. He knew what Halle had discovered. The evidence was irrefutable. Every hesitation, every lapse in protocol, every failed maneuver during the ambush had been carefully orchestrated by a senior intelligence officer who had abused authority for personal gain. Hale's eyes did not leave the files. Her tone, calm but icy, pierced the room. "We are not moving forward until the responsible party is exposed. I survived to tell the story. No one will ignore it." Halle began organizing the evidence, documenting the leaks, and cross-referencing them with enemy movements. Each successful mapping revealed the extent of the conspiracy. Mission coordinates had been passed to insurgents days in advance. Supply routes had been compromised, and false information had ensured her convoy would be vulnerable. She worked methodically, like a sniper lining up a perfect shot, leaving no detail unexamined. Yet the deeper she delved, the clearer it became that exposing the betrayal would not be simple. Political considerations, layers of Black Ops secrecy, and fear of scandal meant that many within the command structure would prefer silence. Hale's survival alone challenged their narrative. To act carefully was essential. She would not risk her mission by confronting the officer recklessly. She would strike strategically, gathering undeniable proof and preparing for a confrontation that could not be ignored. Days passed as Hale reconstructed the ambush in precise detail. Using intercepted communications, she identified the officer responsible, Colonel Maddox, a man whose calm demeanor had concealed ruthless ambition. He had manipulated intelligence channels, using Hale's convoy as a pawn to cover other operations of his own. The realization was infuriating, but Hale remained focused. Anger could cloud judgment, and she needed precision. Delta had taught her that clarity under pressure was a weapon. Hale shared her findings with Diaz and a few trusted team members. Their reactions were a mixture of awe, relief, and fear. They could scarcely believe she had survived the desert alone, let alone gathered the evidence necessary to hold a senior officer accountable. Diaz, younger and less jaded than the rest, voiced what others only whispered. "We thought we lost you. But this changes everything." Hale nodded silently. It did. The playing field had shifted. The hunter had become the orchestrator, and the betrayer was now a target under scrutiny. Meanwhile, Maddox remained unaware of the net tightening around him. He continued to operate from his office, believing his manipulation had gone unnoticed. Hale's approach was indirect. She moved carefully, ensuring that every intercepted message, every stolen file, and every operational anomaly pointed directly to him. Her strategy was surgical. She could not allow him to escape accountability. And the more she studied his patterns, the more she understood how to dismantle his influence without endangering her team. Hale's personal trauma from the desert fueled her resolve. She remembered the sun-blasted dunes, the nights under freezing skies, the hunger and thirst that clawed at her body. She had faced death and had stared into its face unflinchingly. Nothing Maddox could do would intimidate her. She was Delta through and through, trained to endure and overcome. Survival had proven her strength. Justice would prove her purpose. Her plan began to coalesce. Hale would confront Maddox in a controlled environment, armed with evidence that could not be disputed. The intercepted communications, the stolen intelligence, and the testimony of her surviving team members would all converge to expose him. But she knew the confrontation itself would be dangerous. Maddox was cunning, experienced, and ruthless. He might attempt to manipulate or intimidate. Hale had to anticipate every contingency. To ensure success, she trained mentally and physically, revisiting combat drills, tactical maneuvers, and interrogation techniques. Each night, she reviewed her path to the confrontation, visualizing every step, every potential reaction, every outcome. The desert had taught her patience, observation, and adaptability. Now, those lessons became her tools of justice. She was preparing not just for confrontation, but for a reckoning. Hale also considered the political ramifications. Evidence alone would not be enough. The timing, presentation, and corroboration of facts were critical. She planned for multiple contingencies, leaks, attempts to suppress evidence, and even potential threats to her life. Her survival instincts from the desert, once focused solely on evading death, now sharpened her strategic mind. Every move was deliberate, every decision calculated. Finally, the day came when Hale felt ready. She had compiled the full dossier on Maddox, verified every detail, and coordinated with trusted allies who could corroborate her findings. She confronted Reese and Diaz, outlining the plan. "We act together," she said firmly. "No one outside this circle until the evidence is undeniable. This is our only chance to hold him accountable. I survived the desert. Now it's time he faces the truth." Hawley moved with deliberate calm into the operations center, her presence commanding attention. Maddox was there, reviewing reports, unaware of the storm about to hit him. Hale's voice cut through the room like a blade. "Colonel Maddox, we need to talk." His eyes flicked up, surprise flashing briefly before composure returned. Hawley did not hesitate. She laid out the evidence, step by step, leaving no room for doubt. Every intercepted communication, every leaked coordinate, every manipulated order was presented meticulously, backed by her first-hand account. Maddox attempted to deflect, to argue, to intimidate. Hawley remained unflinching, her eyes locked on his. The calm intensity of someone who had survived near impossible odds radiated from her. She was no longer just a soldier reporting betrayal. She was the embodiment of resilience, a force that had endured and overcome. Each denial, each feigned excuse, crumbled under the weight of her evidence. By the end of the confrontation, Maddox's composure faltered. He realized the extent of Hale's preparation, her evidence, and the resolve behind every word. Hawley had not come for vengeance, she had come for truth. And truth, she knew, was more powerful than fear. As Maddox left the operations center under supervision, Hawley turned to Diaz and Reese. Her body was exhausted, her wounds still raw, but her spirit was unbroken. "This is only the beginning," she said quietly. "The desert tried to claim me. Betrayal tried to break me. But I survived. And now they will learn that Delta doesn't fear death." Hale's legend continued to grow, not just among the enemy, but among her own people. Survivors whispered of her resilience, the ghost who had returned from near death to expose corruption. She had survived the impossible, and her mission of justice was only beginning. The desert had tested her, the betrayal had challenged her, and now, with truth in hand, Hawley was ready to face whatever came next. She had survived death, endured solitude, and uncovered conspiracy. The reckoning was near, and the world, beginning with those who had underestimated her, would soon witness the unstoppable force that was Sergeant Major Lauren Hawley. The tension in the operations center was palpable. Sergeant Major Lauren Hall stood with calm intensity, her body battered from the desert, but her mind sharper than ever. Every eye in the room was on her as she laid out the evidence against Colonel Maddox. Soldiers whispered under their breath, astonished at her presence. The woman who had been left to die had returned not only alive, but armed with the truth. Hale's jaw was set, her eyes unwavering. She had survived unimaginable pain and betrayal, and now it was time for justice. Maddox entered, attempting to maintain composure. He was met with Hale's piercing gaze, the kind that had stared down death and emerged victorious. She did not waste time with pleasantries. "Colonel Maddox," she began, her voice cold and precise, "you orchestrated an ambush that was meant to kill me and compromise the mission. Every order you manipulated, every communication you falsified, has been documented and verified." The room grew silent. Even Reese, who had once dismissed her warnings, now watched Hawley with respect and apprehension. Her evidence was undeniable: intercepted messages, coordinated enemy movements, and testimonies from surviving operatives all pointed directly to Maddox. There was no room for argument. Hawley had not only survived the desert, she had become the embodiment of precision and determination, a force that could not be ignored. Maddox's first instinct was to deflect. "Sergeant Major Hawley, you survived against impossible odds." "Yes," he said, attempting to calm the room. "But your interpretation—" Hawley cut him off with a measured hand, her eyes locking on his. "Interpretation?" she repeated sharply. Every document, every intercepted transmission, every movement of the enemy confirms your betrayal. Do not underestimate me. The power dynamic in the room shifted instantly. Maddox, a man accustomed to command and control, suddenly felt the weight of his actions pressed against him by a woman he had presumed dead. Hale's presence alone conveyed authority. Her calm yet unyielding demeanor demanded attention. She was not seeking vengeance in the way of retaliation. She sought accountability, and the room knew it. Hale began presenting her findings systematically. Each communication was displayed on screens, every map marked with manipulated coordinates, and photographs of enemy positions highlighted the consequences of Maddox's betrayal. Soldiers in the room could see the full scope of his deception, not just the ambush, but the ripple effects that endangered countless lives. It was meticulous, undeniable, and methodical. Maddox attempted to argue, to weave half-truths and blame the chaos on miscommunication. But Hale anticipated each move. Her strategy was precise. She countered each claim with concrete evidence, her knowledge of the desert ambush providing first-hand credibility. "Do not mistake my survival for mere luck," she said. "I lived because I adapted, I endured, and I observed. And in observing, I discovered every lie you told." The confrontation escalated as Hale called in surviving operatives from the ambushed convoy. They corroborated her testimony, providing additional evidence of orders that had been falsified, communications deliberately ignored, and intelligence deliberately misrepresented. Each voice in the room strengthened Hale's position. The realization dawned on Maddox that his deception was unraveling, not just with evidence, but with the credibility of the woman he had thought dead. By midday, the room was tense with anticipation. Maddox's usual confidence had eroded under the relentless presentation of truth. Command officials were summoned, each reviewing Hale's compiled dossier. There was no room for doubt. Her survival, combined with the tangible evidence, made the case unassailable. Maddox attempted one final maneuver, seeking to manipulate higher-ranking officials, but Howell was ready. Every word he uttered was anticipated and countered, every defense dismantled. The ghost of the desert had become the arbiter of justice. In private, Hale faced Maddox directly. The room outside waited, but this moment was personal. Her voice was quiet yet steely. "You assumed my absence would silence inquiry. You assumed death would erase accountability. You were wrong. Delta Force does not fear death, Colonel. And neither do I." Maddox could only stare, his composed facade crumbling. He had underestimated her strength, her resilience, and her unwavering commitment to truth. Haya handed over the final piece of evidence. Her desert logs, photographs, intercepted enemy communications, and analyses of operational failures. Maddox's career and freedom now rested on the irrefutable documentation that she had painstakingly gathered. His attempts to justify or obscure his actions were futile. The consequences of betrayal, once theoretical, had become tangible, and they were inescapable. As the fallout unfolded, Hale worked to ensure her team's protection. Reese and Diaz had been complicit in decisions made under the chain of command, but not in the betrayal itself. Hale advocated for their continued service, distinguishing between lapses in judgment and deliberate sabotage. Her leadership extended beyond revenge. It sought restoration and fairness. Her approach underscored the principle that justice was not simply punitive but corrective. Hale's reputation within Delta Force reached new heights. The story of her survival, meticulous evidence gathering, and ultimate confrontation became a lesson in resilience, tactical brilliance, and integrity. Her operatives respected her not only for her skill in combat, but for her strategic mind and unwavering moral compass. She had proven that even in the face of abandonment and betrayal, a Delta operator could not only survive but thrive. Meanwhile, Maddox was relieved of duty and placed under investigation. His career, built on manipulation and deceit, collapsed under the weight of Hale's evidence. The network of conspirators he had used to manipulate missions began to unravel, thanks to Hale's meticulous preparation and strategic foresight. The ripple effects of her actions would ensure that similar betrayals could not occur unnoticed in the future. In the quiet aftermath, Hale took a solitary moment at the base perimeter, looking out over the desert that had tested her beyond human limits. The dunes glowed under the setting sun, their heat replaced by a cool twilight. She had returned from death, uncovered betrayal, and ensured accountability. The desert had forged her, and she had emerged not just as a survivor, but as a force of justice and integrity. Diaz approached, cautious yet respectful. "Sergeant Major." "What now?" he asked. Hale turned, her eyes calm yet determined. "We rebuild. We strengthen. We ensure no one else suffers because of betrayal. The mission never ends, Diaz, and neither do we." Her voice carried the weight of experience, endurance, and hard-earned wisdom. She had faced the desert, betrayal, and near certain death, and emerged victorious. Hale had become a symbol, not just of survival, but of unbreakable resolve, integrity, and the relentless pursuit of truth. As night fell, Hale knew that the battle for justice was only beginning, but she was ready. The desert had taught her patience, observation, and strategy. Betrayal had taught her focus, resilience, and vigilance. And now, with the corrupt neutralized and her team secure, Hale was prepared for whatever challenges lay ahead. The ghost of the desert had returned, alive, unbroken, and unstoppable. And for those who had doubted her, underestimated her, or betrayed her, the lessons of survival, justice, and unyielding resolve would be remembered. The sun rose over the base, painting the desert in shades of gold and crimson. Sergeant Major Lauren Hall stood at the edge of the perimeter, her gaze sweeping the horizon where sand met sky. The desert had tested her beyond human limits, leaving scars on her body and lessons etched into her mind. But the battle for survival had ended, at least physically. Now, a new battle had been won: justice. Colonel Maddox had been relieved of duty. Investigations into the ambush were underway, and Hale's evidence had exposed a conspiracy that threatened to undermine integrity of Delta Force. She had not only survived, but had turned betrayal into accountability. Inside the operations center, Hale convened her team. Captain Reese, Diaz, and the surviving operatives gathered, their faces a mixture of relief, admiration, and awe. They had witnessed the full extent of Hale's ordeal, and the meticulous manner in which she had dismantled Maddox's lies. "We're not done yet," Hale said, her voice firm but calm. "Justice is more than exposing one man. It's ensuring the integrity of every mission, the safety of every operative, and the accountability of every leader. That's our responsibility now." Hale began a systematic review of all intelligence operations compromised by the betrayal. She cross-referenced files, decrypted communications, and coordinated with allied forces to secure sensitive information. Every step was precise, every decision strategic. Hale's desert experience had honed her instincts. Patience, observation, and precision were now applied not just in survival, but in restoring order and accountability. Reese, once frustrated by Hale's initial disappearance, now stood beside her as a trusted ally. "Lauren, your team? We owe you more than words can convey," he admitted quietly. Hale's eyes softened slightly, a rare glimpse of emotion crossing her stoic demeanor. "We owe it to each other," she replied. "That's how we survive. That's how we win. And that's how we ensure no one else faces what I faced in the desert." Meanwhile, Maddox faced formal military proceedings. Every action he had taken was documented and verified, leaving no room for denial. Hawley had anticipated attempts at manipulation or intimidation, but her careful preparation left him cornered. Justice, once abstract, had become tangible. He would answer for his betrayal, and the ripple effects would reinforce the importance of integrity within the command structure. Hale's presence alone had ensured that deception would not go unchecked. Beyond justice, Hawley focused on her team's recovery and resilience. Soldiers who had been traumatized by the ambush, the desert ordeal, and the betrayal received medical and psychological support. Hawley led by example, showing that survival was only one part of duty. Restoring confidence, morale, and operational trust was equally critical. She conducted drills, briefings, and tactical assessments, ensuring her team was not only prepared but stronger than before. As the days progressed, Hawley began rebuilding relationships with higher command. She navigated the delicate balance of exposing wrongdoing while maintaining operational cohesion. Her reputation as a survivor and strategist became a force within Delta Force. Colleagues respected her not only for combat skills, but for her leadership, foresight, and moral courage. The desert had forged her into a leader who could endure adversity, outthink deception, and emerge victorious. One evening, Hawley walked alone along the perimeter, the desert breeze brushing her face. Memories of crawling through sand, rationing water, and evading enemy patrols rose vividly. Pain, fear, and determination had been constant companions. Yet now, the desert seemed quieter, almost serene, as if acknowledging her triumph. She whispered to the wind, a silent acknowledgement of the journey she had endured. "I survived," she said softly. "I endured. I won. And I will never be forgotten." The legend of Hale's survival spread among operatives and allied forces. Her actions had become more than personal triumph. They were a case study in resilience, strategy, and unwavering commitment to truth. New recruits studied her desert survival techniques, her methods of intelligence gathering, and her strategic confrontations. Hawley had transformed from a soldier presumed dead into a living symbol of Delta Force's creed: adapt, endure, overcome. Amidst the operational victories and restored order, Hawley reflected on her personal journey. Betrayal had tested her not just physically, but emotionally and mentally. The realization that comrades and leaders could be manipulated, that trust could be exploited, had been a bitter lesson. Yet it had also reinforced her own values: integrity, resilience, and vigilance. She had survived because she trusted her instincts, relied on her training, and refused to yield to fear or despair. Her team gathered one last time for a debriefing before redeployment. Hawley addressed them with quiet authority, her voice steady and confident. "The desert took much from me, but it also gave me clarity. Betrayal can come from anywhere, even within our own ranks. But integrity, preparation, and courage can overcome it. You are my team. You survived, you adapted, and you prevailed. Now you carry that forward. No one should ever doubt the strength of Delta Force or the resilience of those who serve." As the debrief ended, Hawley allowed herself a brief smile. For the first time in weeks, she felt a sense of closure. She had faced the desert, endured betrayal, and returned not only alive but victorious. She had restored justice, ensured the safety of her team, and reaffirmed the principles that guided her life and service. The night fell over the base, the desert stretching endlessly beyond the perimeter. Hawley stood once more, gazing at the horizon where the dunes glimmered under the moonlight. The whispers of her legend, the ghost of the desert who had returned from death itself, echoed silently. She had been abandoned, betrayed, and tested beyond measure. Yet she had survived, overcome, and emerged stronger than ever. As Hawley turned to re-enter the base, she carried with her more than survival. She carried justice, integrity, and an unshakable resolve. The desert had tried to claim her, Betrayal had tried to break her, but Sergeant Major Lauren Holly had endured. She was no longer just a survivor. She was a symbol of resilience, a leader forged in adversity, and a force that would never be underestimated. The story of her survival would be told for years, not just as a tale of endurance, but as a testament to courage, strategic brilliance, and unyielding moral strength. The desert had tested her, and she had emerged unbroken. Delta Force did not fear death, and neither did Holly. She had proven it, not just to herself, but to the world. In the quiet of the night, Holly finally allowed herself a moment of reflection. The scars on her body, the memories etched into her mind, and the lessons of survival all coalesced into a singular truth. She had faced death, betrayal, and isolation, and she had won. The desert, once a crucible of suffering, had become the proving ground for her indomitable spirit. She had returned, stronger, wiser, and unyielding. As Holly prepared for the next mission, the final lesson of her ordeal remained clear. Survival was only the beginning. Justice, accountability, and integrity were the battles that defined a true warrior. And Sergeant Major Lauren Holly, the ghost of the desert who had returned from death itself, would continue to fight, unbroken, unstoppable, and unafraid. The legend had ended, yet in truth, it had only just begun.